Support for Renewable Radio comes from Quantum Insulators LLC in Belfast, serving Midcoast Maine as licensed dealers of the Iconium insulation system, healthier, quieter, and energy efficient. More information at 1-866-578-WARM or www.iconium.com. Support for Renewable Radio comes from Harvest Fuels, Midcoast Maine's full-service bioheat oil dealer offering biofuel blends from natural renewable resources for oil heating systems. Information at harvest@midcoast.com or 236-4172.
The time is 9:59 and you are tuned to WERU-FM, 89.9 Blue Hill, 102.9 Bangor, and streaming online at weru.org. Renewable Radio with host Dave Evans is up next.
Welcome to Renewable Radio. I'm your host, Dave Evans, and my guests today are Alec Giffen. Should be there on the phone. Are you there, Alec?
I am indeed.
Good to have you here. And Alec is director of the Maine Forest Service, and Pat Coon of Revision Energy. How are you today?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for having us on.
And I say of Revision Energy. You started Revision Energy. You're
I was
principal of the company.
Yeah, I was one of the founding partners, and I'm actually now officially with Revision Heat, which is a new company that started to focus entirely on pellet and wood-based heating systems.
You have worked with a lot of solar, I think, and other energy sources. Why are you with pellets now?
Well, that's a great question. When I got into renewable energy about 15 years ago, I was really looking for solutions to our environmental problems. And I think for most people, as they start to address it, they'll start thinking solar's the answer and wood just seems a little 19th century and, there's that burning of trees that you have to get into. It's dirty, right. And as I got into it more and more, I realized that there really aren't solutions that don't involve burning things at this day and age. So there's really in my mind, there's no way around it at this point. 30 years from now, we might have different technologies, but right now, I think we're going to be.
So solar doesn't work all winter long.
Well, solar's great, and for the right applications.
Okay.
It does a wonderful job heating water and making electricity, but if you're going to try to make enough heat for your space, that's going to be a challenge.
Okay. And Alec, have you been a lifelong forester, or how did you become director of the Maine Forest Service?
Yes, I am a licensed forester in the state of Maine, and I knew from an early age that I wanted to be involved with natural resource and forestry issues. But my career has been fairly diverse. I've not always been working strictly in forestry, but I've worked on a wide variety of land use issues, including hydropower siting and wind power siting and large-scale land management sorts of issues.
And how long have you been with the Maine Forest Service this time around?
This time around, I've been with the Maine Forest Service for 6 years, 7 months, and 6 days.
But who's counting? I should say that in the name of complete disclosure, Alec and I are second cousins, or first cousins. My mother and Alec are first cousins, whatever that makes us.
Yeah, I've never understood how that system worked.
Yeah,
we are related.
Yeah.
So, from a forest health point of view, why would someone heat with pellets?
To Alec?
You're directing that to me?
Yes, please.
From a forest health perspective, well, I think increased use of biomass in all its forms, firewood, pellets, wood chips, if we do it properly, offers us the opportunity to really improve the quality of Maine's forests and the productivity of our forests. Currently, we grow just a little over a third of a cord per acre per year in Maine. And we believe that there's substantial potential to increase that growth rate. There's one of the problems that Maine's forests have is that actually forests regenerate too robustly in the state. We end up with far more trees than what you need to adequately stock a stand, so that you might have as many as 40,000 stems per acre regenerate in the state of Maine, when at maturity you have a few hundred. All of those trees that are initially regenerated have to grow up and then die through the process of competition within the stand in order for the eventual few hundred to make it to maturity. So the biomass markets, we also have stands that are low quality. In some cases, things like beech, which is affected by beech bark disease. And so there are opportunities to increase the harvest of material from the Maine forest that would otherwise just die and decompose, and use it productively to replace fossil fuels. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a reason for things to grow up and die in the Maine forest, and nobody should think of it that way. Those things like downed logs and snags play an important role, and part of the challenge that we confront in figuring out how to do biomass responsibly is how much material needs to be left in the woods for biodiversity reasons and to protect site quality.
That's a great summary. You know, as I go around talking to people about converting to pellets, we've identified about 6 questions that everybody seems to ask. And one of the first ones is, what about the forest? You know, what about the how much biomass do we have? How much conversion can we do and still maintain a healthy forest?
So does the Maine Forest Service recommend a particular harvesting practice, or does it change from area to area?
Particular forest practices that are the most beneficial for a particular area depend upon the condition of the stand.
And I misspoke. I meant harvest practice, but the answer is probably similar. It depends on the stand.
Yes, it does depend upon the stand. There are places where, for example, if you have an overstocked stand and you have some higher quality trees mixed in with some lower quality trees, and this is, fairly common on Maine forest land, then something like a selective harvest or a thinning from below is what it's called in forestry terms, where you go in and you take the weaker and then a cleaning where you take the poorer quality trees is the most appropriate practice. There are other cases where you have a stand that's uniform size, perhaps the trees are mutually dependent because they're on a shallow soil, so their roots are intertwined, and the stand is mature, and the proper thing to do under those circumstances may be to clear cut it in order to regenerate the stand. So the condition of the stand really dictates what the appropriate management is, and that's why folks really should be consulting foresters before they do harvest, because just looking at a site and having a predetermined notion of how it ought to be harvested may be quite different from what really ought to be practiced in the interest of good forestry and good wildlife habitat management.
Now, you use that word clear cut that has a really bad reputation. Are there limits on the size of a clear cut or how a clear cut can be done? And really, does it improve habitat for other wildlife?
There are limits on clear cut sizes in Maine. That is what our Forest Practices Act deals with, and there are different requirements for maintaining separation zones, and there's a requirement for regeneration, and it's tied with clear cut size. In answer to your question of can clear cutting improve wildlife habitat, the answer is yes, depending upon the species that you're interested. But for example, there are some neotropical warblers who are absolutely dependent upon early successional forests and who will only use a clear cut that is regenerating, say, at age 5 or age 7. They may only use it for a couple of years. Likewise, the Canada lynx, which is a rare, threatened, and endangered species listed on the federal list, is dependent upon snowshoe hares as its principal food. And snowshoe hares, the density of snowshoe hares to support robust populations of Canada lynx are dependent upon clear cuts that regenerate densely to spruce and fir, because that's the habitat that produces the highest density of snowshoe hares. So in answer to your question, yes, and in fact the U.S. Forest Service did a compilation of research that's been done on the northern forest area and concluded that wildlife habitat diversity in the northern hardwood type is maximized by clear cuts in the 30 to 50 acre range, as I recall. So that's what their conclusion is, maximizes wildlife habitat benefits.
Now, I think of pellets in particular as a byproduct of other higher value wood products. What products or processes create the feedstock for pellets, or are there harvests that go straight to pellets?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that. In the past, pellets were made almost exclusively from sawdust, waste product of making lumber. But we ran out of sawdust, and the demand for pellets has exceeded the ability of our waste product stream. So now we're cutting, and I'm not sure, Alec might know better, I don't think people go into the forest with the idea of getting pellet stock exclusively, but it's a virgin material of low grade hard and softwood species.
Okay. I would like to remind listeners that this is a call-in program. Call 1-866-625-9378 to ask your question of Alec Giffen, Director of the Maine Forest Service, or Pat Coon of Revision Energy, or now Revision Heat.
That's right.
Are softwood pellets a way to ease the load on hardwood cordwood for heating? Are we spreading out? Or maybe I should go back a step. I think that people ask for hardwood pellets. Are softwood pellets nearly as good, maybe?
There's a lot of confusion in the marketplace because we have the idea that cordwood has higher fuel content than softwood cordwood. But when you pound for pound, the fuel content's the same, essentially, across species, more or less. So when you chip and turn into sawdust and then recompress pellets, which is the process to make wood pellets, hardwood and softwood pellets have virtually the same BTU content. Softwood pellets help with the binding of pellets. So most pellet mills are adding at least 20% softwood to get a nice long pellet. But in terms of pellet quality, there are a whole lot more issues than a harder softwood. That's really kind of a red herring when it comes to pellets. The real questions is what's the melting point of the ash and what's the ash content. Those are the things from the guy who has to make the mechanical system work that we worry about.
So those are the things that someone should look for when buying pellets? They look for ash content?
Ash content is hard to find right now. There's standards that are being developed and adhered to for all those things. PFI, the Pellet Fuels Institute, and the Maine Pellet Fuels Association are both working on developing standards. It's not something you'll see on the bag right now, but the wary consumer can get that information.
And you can try different kinds of pellets and find what works in your particular appliance. I know I burn pellets in my house and basically heat the place with pellets, just with a pellet stove in my basement. And I found that there was a considerable difference among the pellets in exactly the kinds of things that Pat's talking about. I had problems with clinker buildup with some pellets, and I didn't have it with others.
Yeah.
So you can experiment.
Yeah, so clinkers are when the ash melts, clinkers form. With some appliances, it's not a problem. With others, it is. And different pellets have different both ash content and melting point of the ash, and different appliances are designed to have hotter or colder temperatures at the burning surface.
So what should consumers look for?
Try it and see what works.
Okay. Is there anything that on a label or any information about pellets that can help guide a buyer, or it's really just try some different ones?
It really, the premium pellets have 1% ash content, but that's really a very minimum bar and doesn't really get to the heart of the issue. The other thing to really look at is when you're buying an appliance, make sure you look at it and ask yourself, what happens if a giant clinker forms? Some appliances, it really doesn't matter and the thing goes on working or is designed to take care of it. And other appliances, it really is a problem.
So what else should people look for when buying appliances? Now we're talking both pellet boilers, I understand, and perhaps pellet stoves. I don't know if you work with those or not.
Yeah, we work with pellet stoves and pellet boilers. Good questions. Currently, there isn't a standardized testing protocol. The EPA is supposed to be working on it. So whatever the manufacturer claims in terms of both BTU output and efficiency are pretty much whatever they claim it to be. One thing to ask for is, are those two claims, both efficiency and BTU output, are they third-party tested or are they in-house tested? The other thing I look for when I'm looking at appliances is, what's the stack temperature? What's the temperature of the exhaust that comes out of the appliance? And the cooler it is, the more efficient the system is.
And it can be cool and still safe?
That's, if you follow the manufacturer's recommendations for chimneys, and the better appliances have more stringent recommendations for chimneys to get cooler exhaust gases out of the chimney.
Okay.
Let me add one other thing from kind of a non-technical side. Ask to speak to people that have used that appliance and see what their experience has been. I know when I bought the stove that we put in our house, I knew somebody who had bought this particular stove and had run it for a season and had really good luck with it. So I try and talk with folks who have had actual experience.
Yeah.
Many times it's hard to predict what might come up.
Yeah. One of the cool things about our new business, Revision Heat, is we're a joint venture with the Corinth Pellet Mill. So we're working directly with them. The Corinth Pellet Mill is located 25 miles from Bangor. We're focusing on the Bangor market. So what we'll be able to do is, because there's this, when there's a problem, the manufacturer of the pellets will blame the manufacturer of the appliance and vice versa. But what we're going to be doing is both.
Working with both to resolve.
So we'll make sure that our appliances work with our pellets and vice versa.
Now, there's also, in our listening area, a plant in Athens. Are there other plants in Maine making pellets? Alec?
There's a plant in Ashland that is being reconstructed, I understand, that had a bad fire. And then there's also a plant that's being developed in Strong.
Redeveloped. That one blew up.
Yeah, there's a problem with fires and dust as we get into this technology.
This doesn't sound safe. How safe are pellet stoves, pellet boilers?
Stoves and boilers are both pretty safe. With stoves, any stove, you have to worry about combustion clearances.
Right.
That's the biggest challenge. And whereas boilers, because they're surrounded by water, are inherently a little safer. So, like insurance policies, it's easy to get any boiler approved in an insurance policy. It's harder to get a stove. Most insurance policies won't let a stove go into a non-owner occupied space. But the problem that the plants have been around dust and the process of making pellets.
Like grain elevators in the plains, perhaps.
Right.
So one house I know of has a boiler and a chimney fire every fall. That's a cordwood boiler in the basement. Are pellet boilers and pellet stoves subject to the same kind of operator skills or operator variety that cordwood appliances are subject to?
No, they have their whole different set of issues. They've got to meter the fuel themselves, get it from the hopper into the burn pot. But the beauty of pellet fuel is it standardizes wood and makes it easier for an appliance to burn it. And there's nowhere near the they're essentially a metered fuel just like oil. So if there's a problem, the boiler gets too hot, it simply shuts itself down.
Okay. And
there is one other plant. I've been reminded by Don Mancius, who's sitting here with me. He's the head of policy and management for the Maine Forest Service, and that's the new one that's being constructed in Burnham, and that one was just announced. It's kind of a joint, or there's a relationship with Pride Manufacturing up there in Burnham. We're going to share a wood yard, and it's International Wood Fuels, I think, is the name of the outfit that's building that plant. So there's another brand new one coming online.
There's a lot in the planning phases right now as well.
Yeah. And with regard to the question about the comparison between burning pellets and burning cordwood, I burn cordwood in wood stoves and have for decades. In a house that I owned previously, I had a cordwood boiler, which it turned out was so incredibly efficient that it built up creosote like nobody's brother, and I eventually had to stop burning wood, even though it was well seasoned, because I just had too much of a creosote problem in the boiler itself. So it depends. It depends not only on the operator and the quality of the wood. It also depends upon the design of the appliance and whether or not it's really made for burning wood or whether or not it's made primarily for burning something else.
That's right.
Was it perhaps too large a boiler for the space or for your demands?
No, I don't believe that was the problem. It was the fire was completely surrounded, top, bottom, sides, back, with water.
Yeah, that's rule number one for how to make a really bad wood boiler.
Yeah. Well, I learned.
Yeah.
Okay. Does the Maine Forest Service collect statistics on tons of pellets produced in Maine, or are there comparable statistics on cordwood?
Emerging in terms of the pellet numbers, we do get reports from manufacturers on what they make. And where pellets are new, we're working on refining our techniques for getting that information. In terms of firewood, the State Planning Office did an analysis back in the early 1990s. We've since updated that sort of back-of-the-envelope calculations and believe that it's probably about 1 million tons that's going into cordwood each year, but that's not a highly reliable number. Getting information on firewood where you have folks like myself who cut it on my own land for use, not for commercial use, is very difficult.
Do you call yourself up, Alec, and tell yourself that you just cut a cord of firewood?
No, I just remind myself I did that.
Or do you
That's
have
1,000,001 tons?
Are those helicopters watching me harvest my spruce? I think we have a caller. Go ahead with your first name, town, and question or comment.
Hi, David. This is David, also from Brooklyn. I have I'm mostly listening and trying to learn on this show because there's a lot I don't know. But a question that would help me to learn would be to wonder whether your panelists have any idea of how many person hours it takes, how much people work is created by harvesting cordwood versus running the process from tree to pellet. Just on my own take on things is that anytime, especially in these days and ages, that we can actually increase the person hours that's required to produce a product rather than decrease it, we're helping the big picture. So I'm curious if there are any guesstimates or any it's probably sort of a left-fielded question, but just somewhere in the mix, I'd like to interject the question that maybe it might be good if we could maximize the use of human energy in the course of creating our
heat,
wood energy, our heat. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can give you some. Thanks for the question. I have a little bit of information. At the Corinth Mill, they produce, I think it's a little less than 100,000 tons of pellets a year, and they employ 35 people as full-time equivalents. I think I don't know, the cordwood question, there's more value added to pellets than cordwood, but I think a better question to ask ourselves as a society is compared to oil, because that's really what we're going to be displacing. 80% of Maine heats with oil, and that has to change drastically over the next 20 years, or we're all going to be very cold or broke or both. So compared to oil, 85% of every dollar spent on oil goes out of the state. And I would guess close to 90-something% of every dollar spent on pellets would stay in the state.
And the amount that gets spent on oil, having just substituted for John Kerry last night up in Brewer at a meeting on this topic, is between $5 and $7 billion a year. So if you think of total tax receipts in Maine being $3 billion, and consistent with Patrick's number of 85% of the amount spent on oil going out of the state, we're exporting somewhere in the range of $4 to in excess of $5 billion a year out of the state's economy directly to pay for our dependence upon oil. That's not just oil for heating our homes, which we are apparently the number one state in the nation for being dependent upon oil heat, but it's the other forms of oil as well, for gasoline and other fuels. Anyway, it's a huge problem, and if we want to grow the Maine economy, one of the things that we need to do is not only invest in energy conservation, which is hugely important and can be some of the least expensive to deal with our energy problems, but also convert to renewables of all types, including wood. Huge issue, very important to our economic future.
David called 1-866-625-9378 to ask his question of Alec Giffen, Director of the Maine Forest Service, and Pat Coon of Revision Energy. And I understand we have another caller that's called 1-866-625-9378. Go ahead with your first name, town, and question or comment.
Hi, my name is John. I'm calling from Morrill. My question is, a lot of people go to wood pellets in the interest of greener energy. My question is, how much energy difference is there between producing pellets and producing cordwood? And I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you for the show.
Good question, John. Now, it probably varies depending on whether you're cutting your own wood with a bucksaw or having it mechanically harvested in northern Maine. Do you have statistics on that?
I've looked into it, and how much energy it takes to get a cord of wood the answer is, for most people, it's exceptionally small. The way I've looked at it is pounds of carbon emitted for each resource. So compared to oil, pellets are 90% less carbon. That 10% carbon emissions comes from the energy required to cut, transport, dry, which is mostly done with wood in most mills, and compress. Pellets use a fair amount of electricity in the process, and they use a fair amount of fuel oil to distribute. But still, it's within 10% of oil. And cordwood, I'd say, is more like a 20th.
Within 10% of oil?
It's 10% of oil.
Okay. Perhaps I misheard. Alec, do you have any information on that? How much energy?
I haven't seen a life cycle analysis, which is what you'd have to do the whole idea of doing life cycle analyses is just sort of gaining ground. And I don't believe I've seen one on this specific question. The numbers that I have seen are that for things like producing biomass chips and getting them to the end user is something in the 5 to 10% range. So consistent with the kind of numbers that Pat's talking about. I haven't seen a full LCA for comparing cutting your own wood with a chainsaw or having somebody deliver split firewood to you versus a pellet.
So those are wide ranges for cordwood, I understand.
Yeah.
But we do have another caller. Go ahead with your first name, town, and question or comment.
Hi, this is Thea calling from Southwest Harbor.
Hi, Thea.
Hi. I am happily heating my home with wood, and my conundrum is how to heat our water. And I had lived in a house once that we had heated our water off of the wood stove, and we had built it ourselves, and I think we were just very lucky.
Nothing exploded.
No, nothing ever exploded.
Good, that's good.
We were very happy with it. And since then, I have purchased a pamphlet that says how to build a water heater, but it has warning all over it.
Yeah.
And I guess
what heats your water now, Thea?
We are using oil.
In a boiler?
Our old furnace, yes.
Yeah. Well, this is a really good point because as soon as one of the things we learned early on doing solar hot water was that every day that your oil boiler is just idling, it's not doing any work, it's wasting about 3/4 of a gallon of oil a day. And you backtrack out your bill and you can see that's true. So it's compounded for the people that are doing just domestic hot water in the summer and then just domestic hot water in the winter because they're wood stoves. They're wasting about 3/4 of a gallon a day. So shutting off that oil boiler is key. I'd say there's 3 things you should think about. One is on-demand propane water heaters, very reasonable investments, and if you're going to use fossil fuel, it's a great way to do it. Solar hot water is a fantastic way to shut off the oil boiler for the vast majority of the time. If you're going to do it with wood, there's a challenge with a wood stove, and that is any efficient modern wood stove is not designed to have any water vessel placed inside of it because the combustion process would get all screwed up. So that leaves you with 2 options. One, they sell these things that go on the flue collar, which is a creosote nightmare to put a cold water vessel as the flue gases leave the chimney is a really bad idea. The one system that I've seen that works modestly well, you're not going to get a lot of heat from it, but you're not going to screw up your combustion, is small copper pipes in a plaster cast. Sits on the side or on the top of the stove. So the stove heats up, and you have to pump it very, very slowly. But you can pump domestic water through it. It's completely safe because you're not creating a pressure vessel inside the stove, but it's also not going to be very efficient.
So it wouldn't thermosiphon. You'd have to have an electric pump.
Yeah, you need an electric pump, and I've played with all kinds of different, and I've never had anything blow up either, luckily. But I've stuck all kinds of coils in stoves, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, so putting the coil in the stove reduces the efficiency of the stove's combustion.
Yeah, and any EPA certified stove, you're just asking for trouble.
Okay,
and
I've been reluctant to go to the propane because it's just one more, fuel pumped into, transported into instead of using what's here. Right.
Solar hot water might be a great option then.
Don't your pellet boilers provide domestic hot water too?
They do. A boiler is more expensive than a stove. So for smaller houses that are happily heating with a stove, you're hard pressed to make the economic justification to put in a boiler just for the hot water.
Right. Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks for your call. Thea called 1-866-625-9378. Pellets apparently come in bags or loose by the ton. Is there a simple way to store a ton or two of pellets? How can a homeowner store the loose pellets?
Yeah, so the other exciting thing about our business is we're starting bulk delivery, and it's kind of a chicken and egg dilemma. We've got to sell boilers to create bulk delivery and to justify the truck, but we're making the investments, and we're going to be able to take pellets right from the Corinth mill and drive them to Bangor and the surrounding areas and essentially blow them into hoppers. Those hoppers are one of two types. They're either a manual feed where you can take them out to a stove.
Take a bucket out
Take
at
a
a time.
bucket out at a time.
Okay.
Or they're completely automated systems where the pellets get blown into the hopper and the boiler sucks them out of the hopper. And those are just like oil, except they're not destroying the planet and they're reasonably priced. But that's how that works. The challenge with bags, you can't store bags outside and not expect to get some loss. And it might be minor, but you'll open up a bag of pellets that's been stored outside, and you may or may not have water infiltrated. And if water gets into pellets, they expand and are really hard to burn.
And the water probably doesn't help either. So a person called this morning and said that harvesting a plot for pellets leaves no plant matter in the soil for soil health. And this was a person near Corinth that called in, and I got the impression that this was just an impression, not witnessed. How hard is harvesting pellets on the soil? Alec?
Well, okay, the research that's been done, a lot of people kind of bring the notion from the tropics and all the concerns that there is about depletion of nutrients on tropical soils, where it's really a huge problem. If you cut forests in those soils, you can lose pretty much your entire nutrient store very quickly. That's not nearly the kind of issue up here that it is down there. There are some sites which, if you repeatedly harvested them, and so these would be things like sandy, gravelly sites, particularly ones that have been burned over in the past, so they lost all of their nutrient content. You can have problems if you harvest repeatedly and you take all the material that's above ground. You can have nutrient problems, but that's not the typical case. And I guess in answer to and this has been borne out by research over at the Hubbard Experimental Forest, but the answer to the question is really about what is the harvester doing on the site, and can you take every stick of anything? Yes, you can. Or can you leave some of the material behind so that you make sure that you're addressing not only soil productivity needs, but you're also addressing biodiversity needs, because things like salamanders and variety of different species require downed logs, and they require some material on the ground. The university is working on a set of biomass harvesting guidelines for the state of Maine. Other states have developed them. As I recall from what I've seen in other states, there are suggestions, these are generally guidelines, not regulations, that, for example, approximately 25% of the limbs and tops be left behind, if I remember what Minnesota's guidelines are, to make sure that you're not adversely affecting either soil quality or biodiversity.
Yeah, let me throw in there, too, that what makes a bad pellet is too much bark. And it's the bark that stores all the nutrients. So anybody who's trying to make pellets out of 2-inch limbs is going to have a really hard job making a good pellet. The smaller branches need to be left, don't make a great pellet, and should be left and are where all the nutrients are stored.
Okay. Someone else has called 1-866-625-9378. Go ahead with your first name, town, and question or comment.
Good morning. This is Yo in Tremont.
Yo, how's it going, man?
Fine, thank you. I'm listening to your show, and there's a question arising in my mind. You're talking about growing the economy on a sustainable biomass harvest.
That's right.
Now, that seems a little oxymoronic to me. I don't quite understand how you can have an open-ended expansion of extraction on a finite resource base. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if our panelists envision any kind of limits to the amount of economic growth that can be sustained on a certain land area.
That's a great question. And one, let me give you some quick numbers, and then Alec can expand on it.
I'm going to hang up. Thank you.
The numbers are that the Maine forest currently, and for the last decade or so, have been producing 18 million green tons of biomass in various forms, saw logs, biomass, annually. And Alex, the Forest Service, put out a report that said we could probably get another 5 million of those million green tons sustainably. So we can produce something like 23 million green tons annually forever on our forest in Maine. As soon as you go above that number, whatever it is, you start eating into the sustainability of the forest. If we were to convert 10% of our leaky, old, inefficient homes to pellet fuel, we would require 0.65 million green tons. So of the 23 that, or so, whatever that number is, we only need 0.65 for 10%. We're nowhere near that now. And our homes are really poorly insulated. So what I imagine is over the next several decades, as a society, we decide that we're going to be investing in renewable technologies and getting away from fossil fuels for all the reasons. We can heat our homes and heat our businesses with the biomass that currently grows in Maine.
Anything to add, Alec?
Well, I agree with what Pat is suggesting here. We might have a little bit different numbers, and it depends.
I got mine from you. So.
Yeah, well,
take your...
there are different analyses that it depends on whether or not you're doing things like improving silviculture or whether or not you're just taking existing materials. I guess the point is this, that what you get from your forest depends upon how you manage it and what is commercial and what isn't. And both of those things are flexible and can be done sustainably. So we have, going back to a point that I made earlier, I believe that we have tremendous opportunities to increase the productivity of Maine's forests if we intensify management. I have sugar maples on my property that I planted in the mid-1970s that are now saw timber size. I have some larch that I planted, which is damn near saw timber size, and that was only planted 20 years ago. And this is without fertilization. It's just, getting the right spacing and putting the right species on the right site. So there's tremendous opportunity to sustainably, and when I say sustainably, I don't mean just sustained yield. I mean addressing the concerns of biodiversity, maintaining soil productivity, protecting water quality, et cetera, to increase the productivity of Maine's forests. Are there finite limits? Are there places where you don't want to go? Sure. But we're so far short of those, and this is going back to Pat's point, that it's not worth worrying about at this juncture. It may be at some point in the future, but we're nowhere near the limits of what we can produce sustainably.
Thank you. Someone else
Is that indefinite? Huh?
It seemed like a fairly clear answer to me. Someone else has called 1-866-625-9378. Go ahead with your first name, town, and question or comment.
Yeah, this is David again. Sorry to be piggy here, but I got another question. Indefinite, that word indefinite, in relation to the notion of 25% of the tops being left around. I've walked through enough woods to know that it's really chaotic when there's 25. If you go through a clear cut, for example, where they've left 25% lying on the ground, it's virtually impenetrable. And I could imagine that if you were looking for a top dollar quick turnover of your productive land, you would not want to leave that much stuff lying around, because you have to wait for a long time before you can get in there to plant your new trees. And I just want to introduce into the discussion the notion of time and how that relates to scale. If we go small scale, we can't really make use of long time. But if we can go big scale, it all of a sudden occurred to me that maybe we could make use of long time, because we'd have more plots in harvest at any given year, and we could consequently leave the ones we had just harvested alone for a much longer period of time, so that nature could do what only nature can do while we got our backs turned, and we wouldn't be standing there on the sidelines fidgeting, until we got the chance to get in there again and do our thing. It relates. The length of time you can wait, doesn't that relate to the size of the scale of the harvest of the total biomass? That's my question.
Let's see. I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but let me go to. Let me speak to the issue of scale of harvest. Virtually all of the acres in Maine, forest land acres, except for unproductive stuff in bogs or on tops of mountains or whatever, has been harvested in the past. There's not very much old growth left in the state of Maine, something on the order of 20,000 acres, 10 to 20,000 acres total. So virtually everything has been managed in the past. And on the larger pieces, virtually all of it, with very few exceptions, is managed for timber production now. A place where we have a challenge in terms of maintaining forest productivity in terms of timber products is in southern Maine, where we have a lot of small land ownerships and where people own land primarily for reasons other than timber harvest. And it's a portion of the state where growth exceeds harvest by over 2 times, and where I think a challenge that we confront if we're going to maximize the contribution that forests can make while being managed sustainably, so protecting biodiversity, site quality, et cetera, is to how to get those forest land owners interested in actively managing their forests for products, given that they own them primarily for other reasons. So if your question is about are we managing most of Maine's landscape for forest products already, the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to bring into the mix is that, and I'm sort of like backbiting my Earth First friends here, in suggesting that if we could accept that that human use of the forests was a part of the natural cycle of things, as you have said, it has been in history, and just get out of the equation the need to make a quick turnover on our investment, so that the human part could happen, and then the salamander part could happen, and then the rabbit part could happen, and it could all happen in time. I think if that notion could be introduced to these, like, green thumb nature conservative people down in the South who are, I would imagine, philosophically wedded to the notion of green stewardship, and anytime anybody comes in with the notion of sustainable harvest, it's like a curse word. It doesn't need to be like a curse word if we can get out of the notion of having to make a quick turnover on our bucks.
Amen. Let me just. What we see is that some of the best forestry in the state gets practiced by the people who really have a long-term commitment to forestry. So on a very large scale, If you look at, say, the Pingree lands, which are managed by Seven Islands Land Company, and you look at the forest practices on their lands, you can see that they practice excellent forestry. Likewise, you have somebody like Joe Pierce down in southern Maine, who was named National Tree Farmer of the Year, whose family has owned his land, I think, for 5 generations or so, practices excellent forestry. So one of the issues of concern is trying to get people to manage for the long term, getting people to hold on to their forest lands for the long term, because it does promote the kind of long-term vision and good forestry that we need to really be managing sustainably.
And let me throw in a quick 2 cents here, is that from my perspective, it's easy to sell environmentalists on solar because there's no impact on the sun landing on your roof. And it's very hard to sell environmentalists on biomass. But if you look at the numbers and you take, say, what a solar hot water system can do, you can invest in a solar hot water system. The average house in Maine uses 900 to 1,000 gallons of number 2 heating oil a year, which is an abomination. That's just atrocious. And your solar hot water system can in a cost-effective manner, save 200 or 300 gallons of that. That's great, but you still got 600 or 800 gallons left. So that's the issue for environmentalists to face. It's a decision not between solar and biomass. It's a decision between oil and biomass. And even the worst environmentally practiced forestry, I would wager, is environmentally far better than digging up oil that's been safely underground for 100,000 years.
This is really a huge issue that you've touched on, and Pat, you've gone even further than I would go. But the idea that harvesting trees is not environmentally responsible is something that we need to confront as a society. And it's kind of embedded in our culture, this notion that cutting trees is not environmentally responsible. And if, as Pat says, you look at the comparisons, if you build a building with steel studs, first of all, not only do they not perform thermally as well as a wooden stud does, but it takes 10 times as much fossil fuel to create that steel stud as it does a wooden stud. And the wooden stud stores carbon. So this really ought to be, for people who care about the environment, a no-brainer. And we should not be exporting environmental impacts to other parts of the world either. We should be part of one of the great things about living in Maine is that we're connected with the real world. We're connected with the reality of how our lives affect the environment. And that includes managing our lands for timber so that we provide for our own needs and are not just exporting our problems somewhere else so that we don't have to look at a tree being harvested.
I want to get to this last caller's question, but I have, is hands-off forestry ever good? Is never doing anything to a forest ever a good forestry practice?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I am a big supporter of protecting the old-growth forests and late successional forests that we have here in Maine. Please don't misunderstand anything that I've said in that regard. We need ecological reserves. I've been a champion of those for my entire professional career. But those are
we need nice places to hike. But that's a small percentage.
Let's go to this last caller. Go ahead with your first name, town, and question or comment.
Hi, my name is Sid. I'm calling from Appleton, and I was interested in the caller's question and your answer about the amount of energy used for pellets versus oil. The answer was unclear. 10% of what aspect of oil? And is it the equivalent amount of, say, 1,000 BTUs of wood and 1,000 BTUs of oil? Is it 10% of the amount of oil it takes to get the gallon of oil to your house?
Right.
I'll just listen on the phone. I'm done with my question.
I've seen one decent life cycle analysis on the subject, and the answer is complicated, right? Because it depends on where you get your oil, and it also depends on where you get your pellets and how much energy goes into both. Tar sand oil is going to have a lot more embodied energy than sweet light crude from Pennsylvania, which, good luck. And likewise, pellets that are shipped across the ocean to Europe are going to have a lot more embodied energy in them than pellets that are grown in the woods in Maine and then processed in Corinth and then shipped to Bangor. But so the answer is it's ambiguous, but something like one-tenth of the, if you take 1,000 BTUs of oil and 1,000 BTUs of pellets, the life cycle analysis, if you assume that the forest is sustainably managed from a carbon perspective, that the forest is regrowing as fast as it's being cut, 1/10 or 1/9, I think is the number that the study that I read showed, 1/9 of the carbon is let into the atmosphere by burning your 1,000 BTUs of pellets compared to your 1,000 BTUs of oil.
So it wasn't energy return on energy investment, it was carbon
assessment. That's
okay.
Right.
Alec, how do people learn more?
Pardon?
How do people learn more about forest health, about forestry?
Oh, you go to our website, and we have a wide variety of reports that deal with exactly the subjects that we've been talking about here as regards forest health and as regards timber supply and the balance between timber supply, timber harvest, and growth. I would commend to you, even though it's a few years since we've done it, there's a report on our website entitled The State of the Forest Report, and it includes a great rundown of what the issues are that we see.
And how would people contact you, Alec?
How would they contact me personally? Or
yes, or your Forest Service. Maine Forest Service.
Okay. The Maine Forest Service can be contacted at 287-2791, and our website is mainforestservice.gov.
Pat, how do people learn more about pellet stoves, pellet boilers, and the comparative energy of pellets and wood? Or there's a lot of topics.
Yeah, there's the Maine Pellet Fuels Association, which is a wealth of information. The Maine Energy Systems website, if you Google Maine Energy Systems, there's a lot of information there. And in 3 weeks, you can get onto the Revision Heat website. That's revisionheat.com, and currently we have a lot of information about wood at revisionenergy.com.
I'll take that as your contact information. We are out of time. You have been listening to Renewable Radio. I do want to thank guests Alec Giffen, Director of the Maine Forest Service, and Pat Coon of Revision Heat. Thanks to Amy Browne for engineering today's show. Our theme music is Gyration by Beyond the Pale and is used with their generous permission. Contact me at renewableradio@gmail.com. Stay tuned for On the Wing with Joel Raymond.